There is a shadow fact that the Canadian government and major Big Five banks rarely discuss in their glossy brochures. Canada has the highest household debt to GDP ratio in the entire G7. We are a nation living on a knife's edge, fueled by a credit card-funded mirage of prosperity. Meet Mark and Sarah. On paper, they were the Canadian dream, a combined income of $200,000, a detached home in the suburbs of the GTA, and 2 shiny SUVs in the driveway. But beneath the surface of their manicured lawn, a financial rot was festering. They are part of a growing demographic of high-income poor, people who earn more than 90% of the population, yet find themselves checking their bank balance before buying a loaf of bread at Loblaws. The reality is that in today's Canada, a 6-figure salary is no longer a milestone of wealth. It is the bare minimum for survival in a system designed to extract every penny of your labor. Mark and Sarah didn't realize that their success was actually their death sentence. They were playing a game where the rules had been changed overnight, and the open loop they were about to fall into would lead them from a luxury lifestyle to a basement apartment in less than 18 months. The question isn't just how they lost it all, but why you might be next.
The journey to the bottom began with the ultimate high, the promotion. When Mark secured a senior role in tech and Sarah moved into healthcare management, their household income surged. They felt invincible. In Canada, we are conditioned to believe that hitting the $100,000 mark is the finish line. It's the moment you stop worrying. But they quickly learned about the tax bite. In Ontario, once you cross certain thresholds, the CRA becomes your most expensive roommate. They lodged as nearly 40% of their hard-earned raises vanished before the money even hit their Scotiabank account. They were working 60 hours a week, yet the government was taking a massive cut to fund a system that felt increasingly broken. They justified their spending by looking at their peers. Everyone in Oakville had the same lifestyle, the same vacations to Mexico, the same high-end strollers. They didn't see the stress lines hidden by expensive skincare. They didn't see the buy now, pay later tabs open on their neighbors' MacBooks. They assumed that because they earned more, they could afford more. It was a classic case of lifestyle creep, but with a uniquely Canadian twist. The cost of simply existing in a Tier 1 city was escalating faster than any merit increase could keep up with. They were walking into a trap, blinded by the prestige of their titles.
Then came the mortgage. For years, the narrative in Canada has been, get into the market at any cost. Mark and Sarah bought at the peak, fueled by the low interest rate heroin provided by the Bank of Canada during the pandemic. They signed for an $800,000 mortgage on a variable rate, convinced by their broker that rates would stay low for long. At the time, their monthly payment was a manageable $3,000. They felt like geniuses. They had equity, or so the flickering screens of Zillow and House Sigma told them. But this is the curiosity gap that destroys families. Home equity isn't cash, and a house is often a liability masquerading as an asset. As they moved in, the hidden costs of Canadian homeownership began to bleed them dry. Property taxes in the Halton region, surging utility bills from Enbridge, and the Home Depot tax of constant maintenance. They were house poor before they even unpacked their first box. They were living in a museum of their own ambition, surrounded by 4 walls that were slowly beginning to close in. They didn't know that Tiff Macklem was about to pivot, and the interest rate hikes on the horizon would soon turn their dream home into a financial black hole that no amount of overtime could fill.
The first real tremor wasn't the mortgage, though. It was the grocery store. We've all felt the Loblaws sticker shock, but for Mark and Sarah, it became a weekly ritual of despair. They would walk into a Zehrs or a Fortino's, grab the basics, milk, eggs, some chicken breasts, and a few vegetables, and walk out $400 lighter. In Canada, the oligopoly of the grocery industry means there is no escape. They tried switching to no frills, but the prices there were catching up too. They were spending nearly $2,000 a month just to feed their family of 4. This is the visceral pain of the disappearing middle class. The realization that even with a 6-figure income, you are debating whether to buy organic or generic. They started putting groceries on their Visa Infinite card, telling themselves they'd pay it off at the end of the month. But the end of the month always brought new surprises. A car repair, a school fee, a vet bill. The credit card balance began to grow, a silent predator lurking in the background of their banking app. They were experiencing the death by 1,000 cuts,
where the high cost of living in Canada erodes your margin for error until there is nothing left but a thin line of plastic credit between you and total insolvency. As the Bank of Canada began its aggressive campaign to fight inflation, Mark and Sarah's variable rate mortgage hit its trigger point. Suddenly, their $3,000 payment jumped to $5,000, then $5,500. In the span of a few months, $2,500 of their monthly cash flow simply evaporated. This is the moment the shadow fact becomes a reality. Most Canadians are only $500 away from financial disaster. Mark and Sarah were facing a multi-thousand-dollar deficit every single month. They tried to call the bank to negotiate, but the wait times were hours long, and the solutions were non-existent. They were told they could extend their amortization to 40 years, effectively ensuring they would be paying for this house until they were 90. The psychological weight of realizing you are working just to pay interest to a bank is crushing. It robs you of your sleep, your temper, and your hope. They looked at their RRSPs, thinking they could tap into them, but the tax penalties for early withdrawal were a deterrent they couldn't afford to trigger. They were trapped in a cage of their own making, built with the bricks of Canadian real estate speculation and the mortar of cheap debt. The curiosity gap here is, how long can a family tread water when the water level keeps rising by $1,000 a month? To maintain appearances, they made a fatal mistake. They prioritized the image of wealth over the reality of survival. In the GTA, status is everything. You can't be the couple that suddenly stops going to the cottage or sells the Audi for a 10-year-old Civic. They leaned into their line of credit, LOC, a tool that many Canadians treat like a second checking account. With a $200,000 limit, it felt like a safety net. But an LOC is a trap with teeth. As interest rates rose, the cost of carrying that debt tripled. They were now paying interest on the interest they had used to pay for last year's groceries. This is the spiral that consumes the middle class. They weren't buying yachts or Ferraris. They were simply trying to maintain a standard of living that their parents achieved on a single high school graduate income. The gap between their reality and their lifestyle was being filled by compound interest working against them. They started to withdraw from social circles, making excuses for why they couldn't join the annual ski trip to Blue Mountain. The shame of financial struggle is a silent killer in Canada. We don't talk about it at the Tim Hortons drive-thru or the hockey rink, but it's there, a collective anxiety that everyone is one missed paycheck away from the abyss.
The breaking point came during tax season. Mark had always handled the finances, but he had been hiding the true extent of the LOC usage from Sarah. When the CRA sent a notice of reassessment regarding some missed deductions, the house of cards began to wobble. They owed an additional $12,000. In Canada, the CRA has powers that would make a debt collector blush. They can freeze your accounts and garnish your wages without a court order. The fear of the taxman is a visceral part of the Canadian psyche. Mark sat in his home office, staring at the brown envelope, realizing they had $0 in their emergency fund. Their TFSA, the tax-free savings account, was empty. They had made the classic mistake of using it as a rainy day fund for minor inconveniences, rather than a long-term investment vehicle. Now, when a real storm had arrived, the umbrella was gone. The curiosity gap here is profound. Why do we call it a savings account when it should be an investment account? By the time they realized the difference, it was too late. They were now in a position where they had to choose between paying the CRA or paying the mortgage. It was the beginning of the end of their six-figure illusion.
Desperation leads to poor decisions. Mark decided to try swing trading on Wealthsimple, hoping to catch a crypto wave or a tech bounce to clear their debts. He had heard stories of people turning $10,000 into $100,000 overnight. It was a gambler's last stand. He took the last bit of room on their credit card and moved it into a volatile market. But the market doesn't care about your mortgage payment. A sudden dip in the Nasdaq wiped out half of his investment in 48 hours. This is the emotional pain of the disappearing middle class. The feeling of being so backed into a corner that you start taking risks you would have laughed at a year ago. Sarah found out when the grocery cart was declined at the Loblaws checkout. Standing there with a line of people behind her, the cashier's "declined" message felt like a public execution of her dignity. She had to leave the cart full of food behind and walk out. That walk to the car in the freezing Canadian slush was the moment she realized they weren't just going through a rough patch. They were losing. They were the couple the news reports talked about, the ones who did everything right and still found themselves staring at an empty pantry. The argument started shortly after. Money is the leading cause of divorce in Canada. And for Mark and Sarah, it was a constant, low-grade fever that occasionally spiked into a full-blown infection. Every purchase was scrutinized. A $5 coffee was a betrayal. A Netflix subscription was a luxury they couldn't afford. They were living in a $1 million home but felt like they were in a prison. The relatable Canadian life they once enjoyed, weekend trips to Niagara, dinners on King Street, shopping at Yorkdale, was replaced by a grim tally of cents and dollars. They realized that their high income had actually made them more vulnerable. Because they earned so much, they didn't qualify for any government rebates or subsidies. They were in the dead zone of the Canadian economy. Too rich for help, too poor to survive. They were the engine of the country, yet they were being run until the pistons seized. The open loop of their marriage was now, can love survive when the bank account is at zero? They were discovering that the shadow fact of debt doesn't just destroy your credit score, it destroys your soul and your relationships.
They tried to sell the house. They thought that by liquidating their greatest asset, they could reset. But the market had shifted. With interest rates at a 20-year high, buyers were scarce. The houses on their street that used to sell in 3 days with 20 offers were now sitting for months. They had to cut their price by $50,000, then $100,000. After real estate commissions, land transfer taxes, and legal fees, they realized they would walk away with almost nothing. The equity they had counted on was a phantom. This is the harsh reality of the Canadian real estate bubble. It's only wealth if you can get it out. For Mark and Sarah, the house had become an anchor, dragging them to the bottom of the lake. They were facing negative equity, where they owed the bank more than the house was worth. The fear was no longer about losing their lifestyle. It was about the bank coming after their future wages to cover the shortfall. They were trapped in a legal and financial nightmare that is becoming increasingly common from Vancouver to Halifax. The curiosity gap was now, if the house won't save them, what will? In a desperate attempt to save their credit, they turned to a private lender. In the world of Canadian finance, private lenders are the sharks that circle when the big banks smell blood. They offered a short-term loan at 12% interest, plus heavy fees. Mark and Sarah took it, thinking it would buy them 6 months to figure things out. Modern Canadian experience. You work harder, you earn more, yet you have less. The systemic failure of the middle class is that the cost of debt is rising faster than the value of labor. They were now part of the underground economy of debt, the millions of Canadians who are technically insolvent but still showing up to work in business casual attire. They were living a lie that was becoming impossible to maintain, as the private lender began calling their phones 3 times a day. The physical toll began to manifest. Mark developed chronic insomnia, staring at the ceiling and calculating the interest he was accruing every second. Sarah started having panic attacks in the hospital break room. This is the part of the 6-figure loss story people don't talk about, the health crisis. In Canada, we have free healthcare, but it doesn't cover the cost of a broken spirit or the therapy needed to survive financial ruin. They were exhausted, burnt out, and losing their grip on their professional lives. Mark's performance at work slipped, and the threat of a layoff, a common occurrence in the Canadian tech sector lately, loomed like a guillotine. If he lost his job, the entire house of cards would collapse in 24 hours. The curiosity gap here is, what happens when the safety net of a high-paying job is the only thing keeping you from the street? They were living in a constant state of fight or flight, their bodies flooded with cortisol, their minds unable to find a way out of the math. They were the walking wounded of the Canadian economy, hidden in plain sight. One Tuesday afternoon, the inevitable happened. Mark was called into a Zoom meeting. In 15 minutes, his 6-figure salary was gone. A restructuring meant his role was redundant. No severance package could cover the debt load they carried. This is the moment of total clarity that comes with disaster. The illusion was finally shattered. Without that paycheck, they couldn't even afford the interest on their loans, let alone the principal. Sarah's income alone couldn't even cover the mortgage. They sat in their granite countertop kitchen and cried, not for the house, but for the time they had wasted chasing a version of success that was designed to fail. They were now facing the reality of the Canadian social safety net, which is often a tangled mess of bureaucracy and employment insurance that wouldn't cover their property taxes. They were officially lost. The curiosity gap was no longer about saving their credit. It was about where they would sleep in 30 days. The transition from six-figure earners to homeless is much shorter than most Canadians want to admit. They had to make the hardest call of their lives, calling a bankruptcy trustee. In Canada, a consumer proposal or bankruptcy is the final admission of defeat. It stays on your record for years, a scarlet letter in the eyes of the financial system. But for Mark and Sarah, it was the only way to stop the bleeding. The trustee looked at their numbers and shook his head. He had seen this hundreds of times in the last year. "You're not alone," he told them. "I'm seeing doctors, lawyers, and engineers every day." This is the shadow fact coming full circle. The system is failing the very people who keep it running. They had to surrender their SUVs. They had to sell their furniture on Facebook Marketplace for pennies on the dollar. Watching strangers come into their home to haggle over their dining table, the table where they had hosted Christmas dinners, was a visceral humiliation. Each item sold felt like a piece of their identity being stripped away. They were being hollowed out by the very economy they had trusted to protect them.
The foreclosure notice finally arrived, taped to their front door. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic music, just a piece of paper in a plastic sleeve. They had 30 days to vacate. The bank, the same one that had sent them pre-approved credit limit increases for years, was now their landlord, and it wanted them out. This is the ultimate pain point of the Canadian middle class. The realization that you never really owned your home. You were just renting it from the bank with the illusion of equity. They began packing their lives into cardboard boxes from U-Haul. They realized how much stuff they had accumulated to fill the void left by their stress. Thousands of dollars in gadgets, clothes, and home decor that were now just a burden. They were moving from a 4-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom basement apartment in a less desirable part of town. It was a downward mobility that they never thought possible. The curiosity gap was, how do you explain this to your children? How do you tell them that the life they knew was a bubble that finally burst?
The move was a blur of back-breaking labor and silent resentment. The basement apartment was damp and smelled of old laundry, a far cry from their climate-controlled suburban oasis. But as they sat on their old sofa in the cramped space, something strange happened. The crushing weight of the debt was gone. Because they had declared bankruptcy, the calls stopped, the interest stopped accruing. For the first time in 5 years, they weren't working to pay for a lifestyle they couldn't afford. They were broke, yes, but they were no longer in debt. This is the paradox of the Canadian financial trap. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find freedom. They started eating simple meals, beans, rice, the basics they used to overlook. They realized that the Loblaws effect was less painful when you weren't also trying to pay an $8,000 monthly overhead. They were learning the hard way that wealth isn't what you earn, it's what you keep. And they had kept nothing because they had tried to have everything.
Mark took a job at a local warehouse, a massive step down from his tech executive role, but it was steady work. Sarah continued her management job, but with a new perspective. They were now living on a fraction of what they used to earn, yet they felt more stable. This is the lesson for all Canadians. The system is designed to keep you in a cycle of consumption and debt. To break free, you have to be willing to look unsuccessful in the eyes of society. They stopped caring about the SUVs and the GTA status symbols. They started using the bus and the GO train. They discovered that Canada is a very different country when you aren't viewing it through the tinted windows of a luxury vehicle. They saw the thousands of others struggling, the seniors who couldn't afford their medication, the students living in overcrowded basements. They realized that the middle class was a disappearing island, and they had been lucky enough to find a life raft, even if it was a humble one. They started over with a cash-only mentality. No more credit cards, no more LOCs. They used the envelope system that their grandparents used. This is a radical act in a country that is trying to move toward a cashless, credit-dependent society. Every dollar was accounted for. They realized that their previous 6-figure life was actually a form of slavery. They were slaves to the Bank of Canada's interest rates, slaves to the CRA's demands, and slaves to their own ego. By losing it all, they had gained a financial education that no MBA could provide. They learned the difference between an RRSP, which is just a tax-deferred liability, and true financial independence. They began to build a small, real emergency fund, $500 at a time, tucked away in a high-interest savings account at a credit union, far away from the big five banks. The curiosity gap here is, can you actually thrive in Canada without participating in the debt machine? Mark and Sarah were determined to find out. They also discovered the power of community. When you aren't spending all your time working to pay off a mortgage, you have time to talk to your neighbors. They found a network of people who were also opting out of the Canadian dream trap. They traded tips on where to find the cheapest produce, how to challenge property tax assessments, and how to navigate the crumbling healthcare system. They realized that the shadow fact of debt is what keeps us isolated. When we are all struggling in secret, we can't help each other. But when the secret is out, the shame disappears. They started a small garden in the patch of dirt outside their basement unit, growing their own tomatoes and lettuce to offset the Loblaws prices. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They were taking back control of their lives, one vegetable at a time. The emotional pain was being replaced by a sense of resilience that they had never known in their years of prosperity. The biggest mistake they reflected on was their RRSP strategy. They had poured money into it to get the tax refund, which they then spent on more consumer goods. They didn't realize that they were just kicking the tax bill down the road. In Canada, the RRSP is often a trap for the middle class because when you finally withdraw it, it can claw back your old age security, OAS. They should have prioritized their TFSA for actual investments, not just savings. They had followed the standard advice, and it had failed them. This is the curiosity gap that every Canadian needs to bridge. The financial advice given by the banks is designed to benefit the banks, not you. Mark and Sarah began to study real finance, not the retail version sold on TV. They learned about asset allocation, low-cost ETFs, and the importance of geographic diversification. They realized that keeping all their eggs in the Canadian basket, the Canadian dollar, Canadian real estate, and a Canadian job was the ultimate risk. 2 years after their bankruptcy, Mark and Sarah are not rich by the old standards, but they are wealthy in a way they never were before. They have no debt. They have a small but growing investment portfolio. And most importantly, they have their time back. They no longer work 60 hours a week. They take walks in the park, they play with their kids, and they sleep through the night. The disappearing middle class is a reality, but you don't have to disappear with it. You can choose a different path. Mark and Sarah's story is a warning, but it's also a blueprint for survival. The Canadian economy is a predator, but once you understand how it hunts, through debt, inflation, and taxes, you can learn how to stay out of its jaws. They lost their six-figure income, their house, and their status, but they found their freedom. And in today's Canada, freedom is the rarest luxury of all. As you watch this, you might think you are safe. You might have a good job, a house with some equity, and a solid credit score. But remember Mark and Sarah. They thought the same thing. The rules of the Canadian economy have changed, and the old path to success is now a path to ruin. If you are carrying a large mortgage, if you are relying on credit cards to bridge the gap at the grocery store, or if you think your high salary makes you immune to inflation, you are in the crosshairs. The shadow fact of debt is waiting to claim its next victim. Don't let it be you. Take a hard look at your numbers tonight. Ask yourself, if my income disappeared tomorrow, how long would I survive? If the answer is less than a month, you are living on borrowed time. The story of Mark and Sarah isn't just about a couple who lost it all. It's a mirror for a nation in crisis. The question is, what will you do before the reflection becomes your reality? The loop is closing. Will you break free, or will you be consumed?